I love this story. One year, a young Ojibwa boy was given the task of ensuring the entire village had enough wood for the winter. This was the first time he had been given such an honor, and he wanted to do it right. And so before he went to work, he decided to call the weatherman in town to ask what kind of winter was expected. Weatherman told him that it was going to be warm and uneventful. The boy thought to himself, wow, that's great. So I won't have to work too hard, and I'll be able to look good in front of the whole tribe. Just to be safe, he gathered a few of his friends, and they went to work for a week. And at the end of the week, after chopping and piling the wood, the boy decided to give the weatherman a second call just to make sure. And the weatherman told him that it was now going to be a very cold winter. Shocked at this sudden change and not wanting to disappoint the elders of the village, he gathered more friends and they went to work. And for 2 weeks, they cut and piled wood, hoping that it would be enough to last the whole winter. Once again, the boy called the weatherman, and this time the weatherman told him, son, it's going to be very bitter cold. It's going to be a long winter, maybe the worst on record. Little boy said, well, why do you say that? What's going on? Weatherman replied, the natives are gathering wood like crazy. Well, we are talking about preparation today, and we have a great question. I just love this question. I hope some of you can answer it. Has God sent a person or used an experience in your life to point you to faith in Jesus? Give you a second to think about that. Has God sent a person or used an experience in your life to point you to faith in Jesus? And if you've not been here before, you can answer the question. You just need to get our attention, stand up, speak directly into the mic, and give us a brief answer. And we are looking for more than a yes or no.
Good morning, my name's Doug. And I guess the experience comes to mind is I think I shared with some of you before I lost my wife about 15 years ago to a brain tumor. We lived in Las Vegas. And as you can imagine, it was a terrible, horrible experience to go through. And I think I'd only gotten through that experience because of the church that we went to. There was a small, actually it was kind of a transplant North Dakota, Minnesota Lutheran church. It was called Good Samaritan Lutheran Church in Las Vegas. And it was just filled with real loving people, and it was only through that experience, I think, that I survived that whole incident. So that's definitely an experience that comes to my mind where Jesus entered my heart and my life. So thank you.
Thanks, Doug. Great example. Somebody else.
It was about 2 years ago that I read an article in the paper, and it brought me to decide to send an email to Dale and got me involved in Lighthouse.
We have to find some pleasure and humor in God using the media to bring somebody to a deeper faith, huh? Hey, Kelly, awesome.
Being in a high-risk pregnancy with Cartlin, I was scared the whole time. I started coming here, and everybody being so nice makes me want to come back, and I like it here.
Thank you. We are so glad you're here, too. Over here?
I have a sister-in-law who is married to my brother, and about 10 or 20 years after they got married, I could just tell a difference in her. And soon I figured out she had turned her life to Jesus, and I just want to emulate her. She just shines. Jesus just shines through her heart, and I just love her so much.
Yeah, it's very common to have somebody that you know well who has had a spiritual transformation, who has meant something to you. So, behind you there, Lion.
My name is Dave. And for me, I think it was, I was in my throw of my addiction, and I thought, well, maybe God can help me through this process. And through Grand Forks, I had a pastor that did not give up on me and pray for me and his congregation. Helped me through that. And I think through that process and through different churches and Christian brothers that sat by me and through all these different Bible studies, I've been able to find faith in Jesus Christ.
Thanks, David. Great. Anybody else? We could do one more. Somebody else? Lori? Right behind you there.
In 2008, I had been clean for about 10 years, and I had a picture-perfect life. But I felt the sense of entitlement, and I did not appreciate the things I had. In the year of 2008, within 90 days, I lost my husband, my granddaughter, my home, and both my vehicles, which put me back on my knees. And it's been a process, but I definitely have learned that without God and without knowing that everything that you have belongs to God, it's not yours. It took Him taking things from me one by one to lead me to believe that without Him, life is not possible to be happy.
Thank you, Lori. Maybe a good way to end, huh? Anybody else want to share? It's a pretty profound question. All right. Thank you. Do you want to share? Yep, go for it. We'll do one more. Hate to cut people off, so.
My name's Joan. I just wanted to take this opportunity to honor my mother. She was the first person to really show me Christ, because she was such a, it wasn't just coming to church on Sunday. She was someone who was praying all the time and listened to the Word and loved to worship. And her example has meant the world to me.
Thank you, Joan. Very nice. Very nice. And that probably resonated with a lot of people too. So grab a Bible and turn to Luke chapter 1. And in our church Bibles, it's page 849. If you're using a recovery Bible, it's page 1286. Luke chapter 1, page 849 or 1286. We are in early stages of a series that's going to last a few months, going right through the book of Luke. I've been encouraging you to read the Gospel of Luke, and I continue to challenge you to do that these coming weeks. And I want to read actually a number of verses here, beginning at verse 5. And we're gonna hear about God preparing the land and the people for the coming of Jesus. Verse 5. When Herod was king of Judea, there was a Jewish priest named Zechariah. He was a member of the priestly order of Abijah, and his wife Elizabeth was also from the priestly line of Aaron. Zechariah and Elizabeth were righteous in God's eyes. Important note there. Careful to obey all the Lord's commandments and regulations. They had no children because Elizabeth was unable to conceive, and they were both very old. One day Zechariah was serving God in the temple, for his order was on duty that week. As was the custom of the priests, he was chosen by lot to enter the sanctuary of the Lord and burn incense. While the incense was being burned, a great crowd stood outside praying. While Zechariah was in the sanctuary, an angel of the Lord appeared to him, standing to the right of the incense altar. Zechariah was shaken and overwhelmed with fear when he saw him. But the angel said, "Don't be afraid, Zechariah. God has heard your prayer. Your wife Elizabeth will give you a son, and you are to name him John. You will have great joy and gladness, and many will rejoice at his birth, for he will be great in the eyes of the Lord. He must never touch wine or other alcoholic drinks. He will be filled with the Holy Spirit even before his birth. and he will turn many Israelites to the Lord their God. He will be a man with the spirit and power of Elijah. Read the next sentence with me out loud. He will prepare the people for the coming of the Lord. He will turn the hearts of the fathers to their children, and he will curse those who are rebellious to accept the wisdom of the godly. Zechariah said to the angel, "How can I be sure this will happen? I'm an old man, and now my wife is also old, or well along in years." Then the angel said, "I am Gabriel. I stand in the very presence of God. It was he who sent me to bring you this good news. But now, since you don't believe what I said, you will be silent and unable to speak until the child is born. For my words will certainly be fulfilled at the proper time." Meanwhile, the people were waiting for Zechariah to come out of the sanctuary, wondering why he was taking so long. When he finally did come out, he couldn't speak to them. Then they realized from his gestures and his silence that he must have seen a vision in the sanctuary. When Zechariah's week of service in the temple was over, he returned home. Soon afterward, his wife Elizabeth became pregnant and went into seclusion for 5 months. "How kind the Lord is," she exclaimed. "He has taken away my disgrace of having no children." Verse 17, he will prepare the people for the coming of the Lord. The Lord works in mysterious ways. You've heard that phrase, and chances are you have used it at some time in your life. One of the realities of our relationship with God is that it is often hard to see God working while we make our way through life. But when we look back, we can see God's hand at work in many things as we've gone through the journeys of our life. He will prepare the people for the coming of the Lord. You know, the Bible is filled with people that God has chosen and God has used to prepare people for a time when they will come to know Him, or when they will be moved to a deeper awareness of God's presence in their life and to a deeper faith. God chooses and uses people to help us along our journey of spirituality. He will prepare the faith of the people for the coming of the Lord. Well, it's kind of a fun story, this story of Zechariah and Elizabeth. They're a little advanced in years. I don't know what that means, but it's beyond the childbirthing age, whatever that was back then. And they were barren. In fact, we saw at the very last sentence of that section that I read that was a cause for disgrace in their culture. You have children. If you were a Jewish family, you're married, you be fruitful and you multiply. That's what you do. And to not have children was a sign that God was not blessing them. That having children is a sign of God's blessing upon your family. And yet, even in their barrenness, even in their disgrace, they were righteous, it says. Interesting story. They were good, faithful people, even in their struggles. Zechariah was part of the priestly family, we read, which meant that he served in the temple 2 one-week periods a year. And it was a kind of a different culture. If you know the Old Testament at all, people were assigned to be in the priestly family lineage because of where, the family that they were born into. It's an estimate that there were about 18,000 priests at that day. That's a lot of priests. And so they were all assigned 2 one-week periods of a year where they would serve in the temple. And we read that he was selected by Lot to officiate at a sacrifice. This was a very special thing. You only did this once in your lifetime. And so on this day, Zechariah had his once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to serve God and to serve the people by going into the temple and offering this sacrifice. It was a big day. It was a big day. And it was this day that God revealed himself to Zechariah, to this righteous man to this aging man and revealed that he was going to use this man in order to do a new thing. God chose Zechariah and Elizabeth to bear a son. We're going to know him as John the Baptist as we get a little further in Luke, to prepare the people for the coming of the Lord. So God chose Zechariah and Elizabeth in order to birth John, in order to prepare the people. You see how God works? God continues to work through the generations to prepare his people to know him. Well, we can't leave Zechariah and Elizabeth without looking to them for two realities of our spiritual life. Even though it's not the main thing I want to talk about today, I do want to just share two things quick, because these two things may speak to somebody here today. We have this righteous couple, this faithful couple who have lived in shame their adult life. Zechariah and Elizabeth teach us that sometimes righteous and good people have disappointments in life. Is this true for anybody here? Sometimes righteous and good people have disappointments in life. You can love God, you can serve him only, you can love others like Jesus loved them, and you're still going to have disappointments. God does not promise a disappointment-free life. Jesus never says, "Come and follow me, and everything's going to go well for you." We will not know a disappointment-free life until eternity. And yet, Elizabeth and Zechariah were faithful. They were faithful. One of the things that we have to learn as we follow God is that we are going to have struggles in life. We're going to have disappointments. And how we deal with them says something about the God that we trust. Number two, sometimes righteous and good people even doubt God's promises. Zechariah doubted God's promises. I love the story. Here in the high point of his career, God uses an angel to speak to him. And what does Zechariah say? Have you seen my wife? She's old. She ain't going to have a baby. And yet, here's the deal. This is important. God still uses Zechariah anyway. Even with his doubts, God uses Zechariah anyway. So does God still send people to prepare others to know him, or to bring their faith to a new level? As we've heard in the question this morning, God does. God works in mysterious ways, and we don't always see it at the time. I can point to a number of people along my path who have taught me about Jesus and who have led me in my life and my spirituality and led me towards the ministry. God placed in my life a number of young men way back when I was in high school who were Christians. And I remember a good friend very fondly, who I'm still in touch with now and then, by the name of Ben. And Ben shared testimonies with me, shared his faith with me, and guided me along the way a little bit towards the ministry, interestingly enough. And we both are in the ministry today. I remember a pastor who, when I was getting my feet wet during college years, I was a youth director, and I had a pastor who spent an enormous amount of time with me, just encouraging me and guiding me. His name was Dwayne, and he was just a good man who spent, just found a calling, to spend. I didn't see what he was doing at the time, but I look back now and I see that he had a huge role in my journey of faith and in my journey towards the ministry. When I went through some struggles a number of years back, I had a number of people, some of you actually, who were people who encouraged me. I had a man who I'd never met before I went to AA meetings by the name of Don, and some of you know him because he's not well enough to come to church now, but this is his church. And Don was a believer, former drug addict, tough life. And Don was just a man who encouraged me to not only, keep my faith and to stay sober, but also encouraged me to get back into the ministry and help to start the church. I mean, God places those people, who would have thunk in an AA meeting that's where I would have met somebody. I look back even at some of my early journeys in treatment and people who I don't think still go to church today who said, this is kind of what you need to do. Not only does God send people, but God uses our circumstances and people along the journey of our circumstances to meet Jesus and to encourage our faith. It's hard to see it while you're going through it, but looking back, it becomes so clear. It's easy for me to look back at my ministry experience and see how God has used the ministry experiences that I was going through to prepare me for things that were still ahead, that God knew about, but I didn't know about. I look at my first two parishes in the ministry in Bottineau and Minot, North Dakota, where I was on staff. And they both had lots of challenges, those positions. And I saw when I came to Fargo and went and served at Atonement Lutheran Church and grew a large church and had many staff people, how those experiences had prepared me. Even though I didn't want to go through them at the time, they had prepared me for what God had in mind. While I was at Atonement here in town, I had made connections and I had been instilled with this vision of a ministry someday in the downtown area that would reach out to people who were either on hard times or maybe who just didn't know about God's love for them. And what I didn't know is that I was going to actually do that ministry someday. I figured that the big church that I was pastoring might kind of help create that someday, and yet God knew that I would mess that up, and that there would be a whole different plan that He would have. When we look back, we can see how God uses our experiences and the people that we meet to bring us to Him, to deepen our faith, and to unfold new challenges for us in His kingdom work if we are open to it. Can you see it? Can you hear what I'm saying? Can you see that in your own life? Can you look back now and see that God indeed has been using the experiences of your life to somehow maybe even prepare you for this day, to prepare you for what God is about to do? I've learned firsthand that God does not want to waste our experience. There's an old story, you've probably heard it before, of a fellow who had just been hired as a new CEO of a large high-tech company. The CEO was stepping down, met with him privately and presented him with 3 numbered envelopes. Open these if you run against a problem that you don't think you can solve, he said. Things went pretty smoothly, but about 6 months later, sales took a downturn, and the new CEO was catching a lot of heat. About at his wit's end, he remembered the envelopes. He went to his drawer and took out the first envelope, and the message read, "Blame your predecessor." The new CEO called a press conference and tactically laid the blame at the feet of the previous CEO. Satisfied with his comments, the press and Wall Street responded positively, and sales again began to pick up, and the problem was soon behind him. About a year later, the company was again experiencing a slight dip in sales, combined with serious product problems. Having learned from the previous experience, the CEO quickly opened the second envelope. The message read, "Reorganize." This he did, and the company quickly rebounded. After several consecutive profitable quarters, the company once again fell on difficult times. The CEO went to his office, closed the door, and opened the third envelope, and the message said, "Prepare 3 envelopes." I had an extremely unique experience this week for me. I got to go with a friend of mine, some of you know, to a parole hearing. It was his parole hearing, it wasn't mine. And it wasn't a hearing, it was a parole meeting, and it's a long story. He was hoping to move from one state to the other. And it was a highly educational time. We were there about an hour, and I learned a lot in that 1 hour. And we both kind of chuckled. We were sitting there while the parole officer was doing some things at her desk, and we looked up, and there's this sign on the wall. It's got to be the greatest parole officer sign in the entire world. It said this: "If you are looking for a sign, this is it." If you are looking for a sign, this is it. I remember hearing a message a number of years ago from a pastor by the name of Bill Hybels. He's from a very, very large church in the Chicago area. And he said, you know, some of you right now are going through some struggles. It might be some struggles that are not of your doing, and it might be some struggles that are of your doing. At the time, it was struggles of my own doing. And he said, I want you to know how God works in the midst of these struggles, to prepare. He says that God is giving you, some of you, some time right now to figure this out yourself. And he said, if you're in that period, you probably know it, that God has given you some time. He's kind of backed off. He's given you some time to figure out, you know, what you're going to do, how you might kind of move through this. And so some of you, if you're in that period of time, you need to take some action. I wasn't in that period of time. He said, secondly, if that doesn't work, eventually God is going to send somebody to you. God is going to send a person or two to you who are going to say, hey, things aren't quite going right. You know, you're struggling a little bit. We see that. You need to do something about it. Maybe there's some changes that you can make. If you are in that stage, you need to listen to those people, and they might be a messenger for God preparing you for what is to come. Unfortunately, I had passed that state too. And then he said, the third thing that will happen is, bam! God's going to get your attention. And he's going to pull things back. And dang it, that's what happened. I've shared before, somebody told me in my journey, you know, God will get your attention. Sometimes it's with a metaphor, oftentimes it's with a 2x4. I wanted to share that because some of you might see yourself in one of those spots today. It might not be of anything of your own doing, but it might be of some things of your own doing. I don't know where you are. But what I do know is if you can see yourself in any of those spots today, you know that God is speaking to you right now. It might be time to figure it out, or it might be that things are not going so well and you need to make some changes and maybe listen to the people in your life. Or it may even be that God is intervening right now and is speaking even through me to get your attention. If you're looking for a sign, this might be it. I'd like you to grab a Bible and turn to 2 Corinthians chapter 12, page 969. 969, 2 Corinthians chapter 12. In the Recovery Bible, it's page 1492. 2 Corinthians chapter 12, page 969 or 1492. Let me begin reading at verse 1. This boasting will do no good, but I must go on. I will reluctantly tell about visions and revelations from the Lord. I was caught up to the third heaven 14 years ago. Whether I was in my body or out of my body, I don't know. Only God knows. Yes, only God knows whether I was in my body or outside my body. But I do know that I was caught up to paradise and heard things so astounding that they cannot be expressed in words, things no human is allowed to tell. That experience is worth boasting about, but I'm not going to do it. I will only boast about my weaknesses. In other words, Paul is saying, I have had some incredible spiritual experiences, probably that far surpass anything that you have had. God has revealed himself to me in powerful ways, but that's not the important thing right now, Paul says. What's most important for me is to tell you about my struggles and my weaknesses. If I want to boast, I would be no fool in doing so, because I would be telling the truth. But I don't do it. But I won't do it because I don't want anyone to give me credit beyond what they can see in my life or hear in my message. Even though I have received such wonderful revelations from God, so to keep me from becoming proud, I was given a thorn in my flesh, a messenger from Satan to torment me and to keep me from becoming proud. Anybody here ever felt humbled? 3 different times I begged the Lord to take it away. Each time he said, my grace is all you need. My power works best in weakness. So now I'm glad to boast about my weaknesses so that the power of Christ may work through me. That's why I take pleasure in my weaknesses and in the insults and hardships and persecutions and troubles that I suffer for Christ. For when I am weak, then I am strong. The reason why we are so open about our struggles here, the reason why we might joke about being people who are all messed up here, is because we know, we have come to learn in this journey of life and faith that it's not about us, it's only about God's grace. That if we have found any recovery and if we have found any healing, it's not because of anything that we've done. It's because we've gotten down on our knees and that God has somehow showered his mercy upon us. Doesn't mean everything's going to go right. Doesn't mean there aren't going to be any disappointments. We already dealt with that. But what it means is that I am moving forward and that I know God's strength and God's grace is sufficient for me to this day. On this day, God's grace and power is sufficient. Anybody want to say amen to that? Amen. People gather here for such different reasons, and we are all on our own spiritual journeys. But it's possible that God may have moved, you somehow in this past week, months, I don't know. God may have used you in some way, or used somebody else in some way to get you here this day. It's amazing how God works. And if so, I just want to make sure that I tell you how much God loves you. God created you in his image. He loves you more than you could ever know. He knows the stuff you're going through. He still loves you. In fact, he redeems it. He came as his one and only Son, Jesus Christ, to die on the cross for you. And by inviting him into your heart, you can know his forgiveness and his grace and his strength and his power and his mercy. And you can start new today. God's mercies are new every day. He will prepare the people for the coming of the Lord. I want to wrap up this morning by sharing with you the biblical and spiritual truth that God still calls and uses people to be out in the world preparing others for faith in him. It's kind of how God does it. Came across some statistics this week from a book, The Unchurched Next Door. It says 82% of unchurched people would attend sometime if they were invited. 2/3 would be willing to go probably in the near future if they were to receive some information about your local church. If you were a family member, 56% if you were a friend. The vast majority of unchurched people say that they attend a church because someone invited them. Statistics say it usually takes about an average of 7 invitations. 2% of church members invite other people to church. Seven of 10 unchurched people are never invited. 7 of 10 unchurched people have never been invited to church. There is not a greater love that you can share with somebody that you know. No greater gift that you can give than to be an instrument of God, preparing others to know Him. If you have been captivated and overwhelmed or touched in any way by God's grace and love, imagine being able to know that you helped someone else experience the same thing in their life. I just want to remind you this morning that this is the best time to be inviting. It's the best time to be inviting. Why? Because it's Christmas time. Statistics say that even people who never go to church actually think about it at this time of year. The Christmas spirit has people in the right frame of mind. People are curious. And you know people, here's the key, you know people who are in desperate need of good news and great joy. You know people who are in desperate need of great news and good joy. You know, one of the reasons why I have, over my pastoral ministry, spent a lot of time on Christmas is because I know that people come to Christmas services who may never go to church otherwise. And so if you invite people to come to here on Christmas, I want you to know that we will be ready for them with a wonderful service, an inspiring service, and a service that speaks to them where they are in their journey of life and spirituality. And so I just want to lift up again, you know, we have a 5 p.m. Christmas service on Christmas Eve. And we've decided to do something special on Christmas Day, and I want to take this time to invite you. I've come to know at Lighthouse that we have people here who just don't always, you know, through the circumstances of their life and family, don't always have somewhere else to go at a holiday time. It might be individuals, it might be families. And so on Christmas Day morning, we're going to have a breakfast here at 9 o'clock. Yes, we need some help in preparations for that. If you'd like to help, you need to speak to me. We're going to have a breakfast for anybody who'd like to come. You can invite people, you can tell others. We're going to have a sign up because we'd like to know if we're going to have 10 people or 100 people, but you know, we're going to do it. And then we're going to have a worship service on Christmas Day at 10. We're going to have a New Year's Eve party. We're going to have a worship service. We're going to have food and fun on New Year's Eve. And it's not just because, you know, it's kind of what you do on New Year's Eve. It's because there are people that you know who need good, safe, and sober fellowship with others on New Year's Eve. And so we're going to do that on New Year's Eve. You know, we don't do these things just because churches do them. We do them because God uses us to reach out into our community. So I want you to go from this place and be mindful of that. I want you to just imagine as you leave today, imagine that God's light is shining through you in some way that maybe in 5 years from now, I'm going to use the same question that we started with this morning. And Joe or Susie that you know is going to stand up scared with that mic. And they're going to say, you know, there was that time when Ann or Julie or Rich, you know, they invited me to church. Man, I was scared coming. But somehow God used that person to bring me to Himself and to begin a good work in me. Wouldn't that be cool? Say that would be cool. All right, let's stand and sing.